For over 100 years, somebody walking into your classroom with a clipboard has been the main way you find out how your teaching is going. That somebody used to be a member of the clergy. Then it was an administrator with a checklist. Then a principal with a 77-element rubric. And now increasingly, that somebody isn't a person at all. It's a piece of software. Hello, and welcome to another episode of AI in the Classroom Daily, a podcast helping educators make sense of AI without the hype. Dan Cogan-Drew, and I use AI as a thinking partner in preparing each of these episodes, because I think the best way to talk honestly about AI in education is to work with it openly. So today we're going to be talking about a piece that just came out in Theory into Practice, the journal published by Ohio State's College of Education. The article is called The Lure of Automated Feedback, and it's by Helen Hazy, Professor Emerita at West Virginia University. She's been writing about teacher evaluation for nearly 40 years. Her question is simple. When the person giving teachers feedback isn't a person, when it's an AI tool analyzing classroom video and generating coaching suggestions, what changes? And what should we be paying attention to before that becomes the default? I'll tell you up front where this episode is going. We spent a lot of time on this show talking about AI-assisted feedback for student writers. And today we're talking about AI-assisted feedback for teachers. The parallel matters, and I'm going to come back to it. So here's what's actually happening. There's a cluster of companies, EdThena, GoReact, TalkMoves, TeachFX, selling AI-powered coaching tools to schools. The pitch is pretty straightforward. Teacher records a lesson, the video gets uploaded, the AI analyzes against a set of markers, pacing, questioning, praise, transitions, student talk time. The teacher gets a written feedback analysis with timestamps and sometimes a suggested goal for the next cycle. One of these platforms, GoReact, says 20% of US graduating teachers use it. EdThena is being used in professional development program in Spokane, Washington, where one cost estimate is around $5,000 a year for a cohort of 10 teachers. If you compare that to a coach's salary, you can start to see the appeal, especially in these troubled budget times. Hazy reports that schools in Colorado, Maine, New York City, New Jersey, Washington State are already using AI-assisted coaching in some form. And the U.S. Department of Education has named advancing AI to, quote, improve teacher training and evaluation, end quote, as one of its 5 priorities. So it's not a fringe development, it's already arrived. Now here's the parallel that I want to make. When we've talked on this show about AI-assisted feedback in student writing, one of the most interesting things we keep seeing, this is true of our work at Newsella, is that the biggest impact often isn't the feedback itself, it's the quality of the conversation the feedback creates. Student to student, student to teacher. Now, there's this additional voice in the classroom, anchoring its comments to a rubric, defining and reinforcing terms like claim, evidence, reasoning. The vocabulary becomes common. The rubric stops being a sheet of paper handed back at the end and starts living and breathing inside the conversation about writing. That's a real shift, and I think it's worth holding on to next to what Hazy is describing, because the AI coaching tools for teachers are doing the same thing. They're just doing it one level up. They're putting a vocabulary into the room like pacing, questioning, transitions, engagement. They're defining those terms, and then they're going to shape how teachers and coaches talk about teaching. The question is whether the vocabulary is the right one and whose definition we're using. Now, before I get into what this means for different audiences, I want to tell you something honest about my own reaction to Hazy's article because I have history with this question. When I was getting my master's in educational studies, my thesis was on exactly this, using video to study teacher decision-making. I recorded 3 pre-service teachers in 3 different settings. Then I showed those videos to other pre-service teachers and asked them to judge whether the teacher had made the right call in a given moment. Then I gave them more context, something more about the student, something more about the lesson, something about what happened earlier in the day, and I asked again. What I found was that opinions reversed. A decision that looked questionable became defensible once you knew what the teacher knew. A decision that looked smart sometimes turned out to be a mistake the more you understood about the situation. Now, you can take that finding with a grain of salt. These were pre-service teachers, both as subjects and as judges. They didn't have years of classroom experience to draw on, but I'd argue the opposite. The fact that even pre-service teachers, people early in their careers, could sense how much context mattered and were willing to revise their judgments when given more of it tells you something important. Context sensitivity, it's a mouthful, isn't an exotic skill that only veterans have. It's a basic professional instinct. As soon as people are given enough information to use it, they use it. Now that's the finding I keep thinking about as I read Hazy. Context matters, and the loop is harder to close than the technology suggests. There's a real temptation to believe that if a tool can take in enough signals, video, transcript, timestamps, student talk time, pacing data, it can produce a complete picture of what happened in a classroom. But I want to argue and reinforce here that the picture is only as complete as the context the tool can actually see. And there's always context the tool cannot see. What the teacher knew about a particular student, what had happened in the hallway 5 minutes earlier, the unwritten history that shapes the room. The human is the one who is carrying that context. The technology is not. So with that in mind, here's the other thing I want to be honest about. When I read Hazy's article, my first thought wasn't actually skepticism. My first thought was I would have loved that. By way of context, I taught high school, post-secondary for a bunch of years, Spanish, English Lit, humanities. I found teaching to be a lonely job. I never had a formal co-teacher. It was just me and the students. And most of my development as a teacher came from my own reflection, from reading, from the rare chance to sit in on another teacher's classroom, watch how they did things. Real feedback on my own teaching was something I almost never got. A tool that it could have given me a structured perspective on my own teaching, even an imperfect one, even one I'd want to argue with, would have been genuinely useful. Not because I would have treated it as gospel, because it would have given me a view of my classroom I wasn't otherwise going to have, but only under certain conditions. I would have welcomed it if I trusted that the data wasn't being quietly used to evaluate me. If it was part of a human-centered process where the AI was filling in the gaps when human observers couldn't be there. If a real coach or mentor I trusted handed it to me and said, try this, see what you notice. If instead I felt like I was being watched by robots, if the data from my classroom was making its way into a database I couldn't see, and the conclusions drawn from the database were shaping decisions about my career, I would have been resentful and paranoid. It would not have been right for me. That's the line. That's not a technical line. It's really a line that I think is about trust. Sometimes I've heard the phrase that innovation moves at the speed of trust. It's about who's framing the use of the tool and whether the teacher is being supported or surveilled. So let me talk about what that means for two different audiences. One, for classroom teachers. I think the thing that Hazy pushes hardest on is that these tools come with a definition of teaching baked into them. Somebody, usually a developer, sometimes with input from one or two consultants, decides what counts as good pacing. Somebody decides what counts as engagement. Somebody picked the 50 or so markers that the AI looks for. And once those markers exist, that becomes the language of the conversation about your teaching, not because anyone said it had to be, but because that's what the tool can see. Hazy puts it this way: feedback may lean toward the easier to count behaviors, praise, question type, frequency, and it may avoid the more complicated, like content knowledge. And it may avoid the more controversial, like sensitivity to gender differences or culturally responsive teaching. Let me pause because that's a lot to consider. Now, instructional coaches. Here's where the trust question gets really the sharpest, I think. Coaching works when it works because of trust. The Wolfen research that Hazy cites makes the point clearly that teachers benefit from coaching when there's buy-in, common planning time, and a coach with content expertise. None of that is really about efficiency. It's about a relationship. So the pitch for AI coaching is partly that it solves the trust problem by removing the human judgment piece. Teachers can reflect, quote unquote, without risk or fear of being judged, as one report put it. But removing judgment isn't the same thing as removing evaluation. The AI is still making judgments. It's just making them invisibly with a definition of teaching that perhaps nobody in the building chose and that nobody in the building can argue with. So for takeaways, what do you actually do with all this? Let's come back to the parallel from the top of the show, because I think it's really where the practical answer lives. A middle school teacher I know uses a simple tool with her students when they get feedback on their writing from AI, or from her, for that matter. 3 columns on a piece of paper. What do I agree with? What do I disagree with? And what am I going to do next? That's it. 3 questions. The student reads the feedback, whether it comes from the teacher, from a peer, from an AI assistant, and they fill in the columns. They have to make a decision. Not all feedback is good feedback. Not all feedback applies. Some of it is sharp and some of it's wrong. Some of it's technically correct, but beside the point. The student has to do the work of figuring out which is which. That tool isn't really about feedback. It's about preserving the student's authority over their own writing. It treats the feedback as input, not as instruction. And I think the same tool, literally the same 3 columns, could be on the desk of every teacher who's reading an AI-generated coaching report. What do I agree with? What do I disagree with? What am I going to do next? The AI can be wrong. The AI can flag a transition as smooth when in fact you were rescuing a lesson that was falling apart. The AI can flag your questioning as low level when you were desperately scaffolding for a student who needed it. Or I should say deliberately, maybe desperately also. The AI can miss the relational work entirely because the relational work doesn't show up in any of its markers. That goes back to what I learned writing my thesis. The decision in front of the teacher always sits inside a context the camera can't fully see. Reading the report is the easy part. Deciding what to do with it, what to keep, what to set aside, what to act on is the actual professional work. And that's the part that nobody can outsource. So if you're a coach or a principal introducing a tool like this, try the 3 columns. Make the disagreement explicit. Write it down. The point isn't to dismiss the AI. The point is to make sure that the teacher, the professional, is the one doing the thinking. Hazy's article ends with a line I keep coming back to. She writes that as AI becomes embedded, normalized, and taken for granted, it will change us and shape our practices. While it may appear to save time, it will influence how we define ourselves as professionals and the discretion that we retain or give to AI. The 3 columns are one small way of holding on to that discretion. It's not a policy, it's just a habit. But habits are how professional judgment actually survives. So the question I want to leave you with, if your district is considering an AI coaching tool, it's not whether it'll save time. It probably will. The question is, what definition of teaching is it installing in your building? And are the teachers in the building equipped and trusted to disagree with it? Because somebody defined it and almost certainly wasn't your teachers. Thanks for listening as always. If you are involved in the development of one of these products, if you are using one of these products, you are considering using one of these products, I would love for you to write in the comments any perspective you have on AI coaching. Is it succeeding? Is it failing? Is it giving you optimism? Is it giving you further skepticism about AI? Where are you on this? And any examples I would love to hear. Thanks as always. I'll talk to you again tomorrow.